I never knew a single sentence could hit me harder than losing a job itself. But when the recruiter looked me up and down, paused like he was choosing his words carefully, and said I just didn't fit a dynamic environment, something in me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, more like a small tear in a place I'd been pretending was still whole. I walked out of that building trying to act normal, but the second the glass doors closed behind me, it felt like I'd been stripped down to every insecurity I'd spent years covering up with oversized hoodies and forced humor. And the worst part wasn't what he said. It was how fast I believed him. I kept replaying that moment on the sidewalk, wondering why it hurt so damn much. It wasn't the first time someone hinted at my body without saying it outright. And honestly, I joked about it myself plenty of times, because if I said it first, at least it wouldn't sting as bad. But that day, hearing it from a stranger who had my whole future in his hands, it felt different. It felt like confirmation of something I was terrified was true, that the life I wanted was slipping out of reach because of a body I no longer recognized as mine. I tried telling myself it was just another rejection, that this happens to everyone. But my chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with climbing the stairs too fast. There was this heavy, sinking realization that I'd been running on autopilot, eating through stress, hiding from mirrors, convincing myself that being exhausted all the time was just part of adulthood. And suddenly, with one sentence, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I couldn't pretend I was fine. Standing there, holding a folder full of resumes that suddenly felt like props in a life I wasn't really living, I had this quiet, uncomfortable thought. Why did those words break me the way they did? And the truth is, I didn't know yet. Looking back, that moment was only the beginning. Before that day, I didn't think much about the way I was living. I told myself I was just busy, just tired, just doing what everyone else was doing to get through the week. But the truth is, my life had gotten so small without me realizing it. I'd wake up already exhausted, grab whatever food was closest, and convince myself it didn't matter because I had work to do. My whole routine ran on autopilot. I wasn't choosing anything. I was just reacting to whatever felt easiest in the moment. And the craziest part is, I genuinely believed that was normal. There were moments, little ones, that probably should have warned me something was off. Like how I avoided walking past reflective windows on the street. Or how I muted myself on Zoom just to catch my breath after climbing a single flight of stairs. I joked about it when coworkers noticed, said something like, "Remote life is killing my cardio." But deep down I knew it wasn't funny. It was embarrassing in a way that settled somewhere heavy, a weight I couldn't see but definitely carried. Stress became my built-in excuse for everything. Long day. I deserved takeout. Bad meeting. I deserved dessert. Feeling lonely. DoorDash could fix that. Those little comforts worked for about 5 minutes, then left me feeling even more drained. But instead of stopping, I doubled down, telling myself I'd deal with it, once things calmed down. Course things never did. And slowly I felt myself disappearing. Not dramatically, more like fading out around the edges. I stopped meeting up with friends because I didn't want them to see how much I'd changed. I stopped trying new things because I didn't want to be the slowest or the heaviest person in the room. Even my voice in meetings got quieter, like the less attention on me, the safer I felt. It was a strange kind of isolation, the kind you build yourself without ever admitting you're doing it. I wasn't unhappy every second. That's what made it confusing. There were good days, funny memes, the occasional burst of energy. But underneath it all was this constant hum of discomfort, like my body was trying to tell me something I refused to hear. And I kept pushing that feeling away, hoping it would stay quiet if I stayed busy enough. I didn't realize how far I'd drifted from the person I wanted to be. Not until the day someone else said out loud what I'd been whispering to myself for years. And that's where things really started to shift. It's strange how quickly avoiding people becomes a habit. First, I told myself I was just busy. Work was hectic, schedules weren't lining up, the usual excuses. But the truth was simpler and a lot uglier. I couldn't handle the way I felt standing next to people who seemed so put together. Even grabbing a coffee with an old friend felt like stepping into a spotlight I never asked for. I'd laugh at their jokes, nod at the right moments, But inside I was counting the minutes until I could go home and disappear again. What I didn't expect was how that distance would change the way I carried myself, even in places where no one said anything out loud. My old job, people were polite, too polite. They'd check in on me like I was fragile, or they'd stop mid-sentence before saying anything that might accidentally touch a nerve. Hated it. I hated feeling like I needed to be protected from my own life. It made me pull back even more, like shrinking was the only way to avoid being noticed. And the more I pulled away, the heavier everything felt. Not just physically, emotionally, mentally, all of it. There were days I couldn't tell if I was tired or just numb. I'd come home after work, drop my bag on the floor, and sit on the edge of the bed without turning the lights on. It wasn't dramatic, it was just empty. Like I was watching myself drift further from the person I thought I was supposed to be. I tried distracting myself. Podcasts, shows, scrolling until I couldn't feel my thumbs, but nothing really worked. Every night ended the same, with this sinking feeling that I was losing something important without knowing how to get it back. And every morning started with the same quiet dread, like I was bracing for a life that didn't feel like mine anymore. What scared me most was how normal it all started to feel. How easy it was to accept less from myself because it meant I didn't have to confront anything. I told myself I was fine, that everyone goes through phases, that it would pass. But somewhere underneath all the noise, there was this small, persistent voice asking how much further I could fall before something finally snapped. I didn't know it then, but that moment was coming sooner than I thought. When that email showed up, I almost didn't open it. I thought it was just another reminder to schedule something I'd cancel later. But the moment I saw the words concerning trends, my stomach dropped. It was weird. I'd spent years brushing off little warning signs, telling myself I was too young for anything serious. Yet suddenly I was staring at numbers that didn't care about my excuses. Cholesterol higher than last time. Blood pressure creeping up. A note from my doctor that didn't sound alarmist, but definitely didn't sound casual. It felt like someone quietly nudging me and saying, "Hey, this isn't just stress anymore." I sat there for a long time, trying to decide how scared I was allowed to be. Part of me wanted to downplay it, blame genetics, blame the pandemic, blame anything except the choices I'd been making. Another part, the quieter, more honest part, knew exactly what this meant. I'd been pushing my luck for years, pretending my body would just keep absorbing everything I threw at it. And now it was pushing back. What I didn't expect was the wave of anger that hit me right after. Not at the doctor or the numbers, but at myself. At how easily I'd let things slide. At how many times I'd told myself I'd start fresh Monday, only to forget by lunchtime. It wasn't dramatic rage. More like this heavy frustration that sat right in my chest. I wasn't afraid of dying young or anything like that. I was afraid of living like this for another 10 years. Afraid of waking up one day and realizing I'd missed out on an entire version of my life because I kept choosing the easy way out. I didn't tell anyone about the email. Not my family, not my friends. Felt too personal, too raw. And honestly, I didn't want the sympathy. I wanted, clarity maybe. Some sign that I hadn't completely lost control. Instead, what I felt was this mix of shame and determination and fear all tangled together. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, reading the email for the third time and thinking, if I don't get myself together now, when will I? It wasn't a heroic moment. There was no dramatic vow or instant transformation. Just a sense that something had shifted inside me. Not enough to fix anything yet, but enough to make me stop running from the truth. And I had no idea what was coming next. That 10-minute walk shouldn't have meant anything. It was slow, awkward, and honestly, I probably looked like someone who'd lost their dog and was pretending to search for it. But when I got back to my door, something felt different. Not huge, not life-changing. Just a tiny shift, like a door I'd kept shut for years had opened a crack. My heart was still racing a little, not from the walk itself, but from the fact that I'd actually done something instead of thinking about doing it. It was such a small thing, but it didn't feel small to me. The next night I tried it again. Not because I was motivated, I wasn't that person, but because my mind wouldn't let go of how oddly good that first walk had felt. There was this sense of control, a feeling I hadn't touched in a long time. I wasn't fixing my life or rewriting anything. I was just putting one foot in front of the other, literally, and somehow that felt like a quiet rebellion against the part of me that always said, "Why bother?" And during those walks, my thoughts started to sound different. Instead of spiraling about the interview or the test results, I found myself thinking about things I used to enjoy. Music I hadn't listened to in years. Places I wanted to go but kept putting off. People I missed but hadn't reached out to because I didn't like who I'd become. It was like moving my body even a little bit knocked something loose in my mind, and suddenly there was space to feel things other than disappointment. I'm not going to pretend those days were magical. Most of the time I still felt tired, still felt stuck between who I was and who I wanted to be. But there was a new kind of restlessness in me. Not the anxious kind, more like curiosity. Like maybe there was a version of my life where I didn't wake up dreading the day. Maybe there was a version where I didn't hide from my own reflection. That thought scared me in a strange way. Wanting something better meant I had to admit how far I'd let things slide. But it also lit a small spark of hope I hadn't felt in years, and that spark was enough to get me out the door again the next night. I didn't know it then, but that tiny spark was about to push me into something much bigger. It was a strange feeling, realizing I actually wanted more for myself. Not in the big, dramatic way people talk about in motivational videos, but in a quiet, almost fragile way, like holding something small in my hands and being scared I might drop it. For the first time in a long time, I caught myself imagining a version of my life where I didn't feel weighed down by my own habits. A life where I didn't avoid mirrors or dread running into people I used to know. And that thought alone was enough to make me pause, because wanting something better meant admitting I'd been settling for far less than I deserved. As those walks turned into a routine, I started noticing these tiny shifts in my mindset. Little things like waking up and not immediately grabbing my phone to tune out the world. Or catching myself before making some joke that put myself down first. It was almost embarrassing how much those habits had shaped the way I saw myself. I'd been treating my body like an inconvenience, something to work around instead of something that carried me through everything. And realizing that stung more than I expected. There were still plenty of days where my old thoughts crept in, the ones that told me I was too far gone, too behind, too stuck. But something inside me pushed back in a way it never had before. It wasn't loud or confident. It sounded more like, maybe not. That tiny bit of resistance was enough to change how I moved through the day. I found myself giving a damn again, even if it was just about how I felt getting out of bed or whether I'd be proud of the way I treated myself that day. One night, while I sat on the edge of the couch lacing up shoes I hadn't worn in months, it hit me how strange this all felt. Doing something for myself without any guarantee it would lead anywhere. And yet it felt right. It felt like choosing myself in a way I hadn't done in years. Not because someone else told me to, not because I was chasing some ideal, but because deep down I didn't want to keep living like I had been. I didn't want that to be the whole story of my life. And maybe that's what scared me the most. Admitting that the life I thought I was stuck with might not be the only one available to me. Admitting that I could change things if I kept taking these tiny steps. It was a fragile hope, but it was mine, and I wasn't ready to let it go. But looking back, that shift inside me was just the start of something much bigger. What surprised me most was how those tiny changes started bleeding into parts of my life I didn't expect. Switching to water sounded like nothing, but it made me pay attention in a way I hadn't before. Every time I filled that bottle, it felt like I was choosing to show up for myself, even if no one else knew. The morning walks weren't pretty. I was still slow, still stiff, but there was something calming about being outside before the world woke up. It was the only time of day I didn't feel behind. And cooking for myself, even if it was just throwing chicken and vegetables in a pan, made me feel oddly proud. It reminded me I was capable of taking care of myself, something I'd forgotten somewhere along the way. What really caught me off guard was how those little routines started shifting my mindset. I noticed I wasn't rushing through my days the same way. I wasn't numbing out with food or noise every time something stressed me out. Instead, I'd pause for a moment, like I was finally giving myself space to feel things instead of burying them. It wasn't comfortable. Actually, it was awkward as hell, but it felt honest. And honesty with myself had been missing for a long time. There were slip-ups, of course. Nights when I ordered takeout even though I'd planned to cook. Mornings when I hit snooze and skipped the walk. But instead of spiraling or beating myself up, I just moved on. That was new for me. I'd spent years acting like one misstep erased every effort. This time it didn't. I wasn't building a perfect streak. I was building trust with myself, one tiny promise at a time. And slowly, I started noticing things that had nothing to do with food or exercise. My mood felt lighter in moments I didn't expect. I didn't dread checking my email as much. Even my posture changed. Not dramatically, but enough for me to feel it. It was like I'd spent years shrinking and suddenly I was relearning how to take up space again, even if it was just an inch at a time. The craziest part was realizing how good it felt to not be at war with myself for a few hours each day. Those little choices, as small as they were, made me feel like I was finally steering the wheel again instead of being dragged by my habits. It was quiet progress, the kind you almost miss if you're not paying attention, but I felt it. I felt myself coming back online in a way I hadn't in years. And I had no idea just how much that quiet progress was about to change. Caught me off guard how emotional those small changes made me. I wasn't jumping on a scale every morning or taking progress photos. That kind of pressure used to send me straight back into old habits. But one afternoon, when I pulled on a pair of jeans I'd shoved to the back of my drawer months ago, they didn't fight me the way they used to. They slid on with this quiet ease that almost didn't feel real. I remember standing there for a second, staring down at myself like I was afraid to celebrate too soon. It wasn't about the jeans. It was the feeling that maybe I wasn't stuck anymore. And it wasn't just clothes. I started noticing little shifts in places I didn't expect. Like how my breathing didn't sound like a broken accordion every time I climbed my apartment stairs. Or how my energy didn't crash at 3 p.m. like clockwork. Even my morning coffee tasted different. Not because I changed anything, but because I wasn't drowning it in exhaustion anymore. These weren't dramatic changes. They were subtle, almost shy. But they felt honest. They felt earned. What surprised me even more was how my relationship with myself started to warm up. Just a little. I wasn't hyping myself up or giving pep talks in the mirror. That's not me. But I did start catching these fleeting moments where I felt proud. Not for anything big. Just for showing up, for sticking with the small steps I usually abandoned. It was like seeing evidence that I wasn't the person who always gave up halfway. Maybe I'd never been that person, I just convinced myself I was. There were still days where I felt like nothing was happening, where the old heaviness crept back in and whispered that I was imagining the progress. But then something simple would happen. A long walk that didn't leave me wiped out, a shirt fitting a little more comfortably, and it would pull me back to reality. Not the harsh, critical reality I'd lived in for years, but a gentler one that said, "Look, you're getting somewhere. Slowly, sure. But you're moving." And that quiet momentum did something to me I didn't expect. It made me want more. Not in a desperate, all-or-nothing way, but in a steady, grounded way. Like I was finally learning how to trust myself with my own life again. But looking back, those early signs were nothing compared to what was coming next. That morning felt different before I even understood why. I was standing in the bathroom, half awake, brushing my teeth the same way I had 1,000 times before. Nothing special. Nothing dramatic. But when I put the toothbrush down and lifted my eyes to the mirror, something in me hesitated. Normally, I'd look away, fix my hair, check the time, focus on anything other than my own reflection. But not that day. That day, I held my own gaze like I was meeting someone I hadn't seen in years. And it was uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable. Because I wasn't just looking at my face or my body. I was looking at the person I'd been avoiding. The person I'd judged harder than anyone else ever had. And for a second, I felt this wave of embarrassment for how long I'd treated myself like an afterthought. But right underneath that embarrassment was something gentler, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Compassion. It hit me so unexpectedly that I had to sit with it for a moment, just breathing, just letting it settle. I don't know what pushed me to speak out loud. Maybe it was the weeks of small wins. Maybe it was the quiet confidence growing in the background. Or maybe I was just tired of hearing my own negative thoughts. But when I said, "You deserve better," it didn't feel like some motivational quote. It felt like the truth. Simple, steady, undeniable. And the surprising part wasn't saying it. The surprising part was that I believed it. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to feel something shift deep inside me. Like an anchor I didn't realize I was dragging had finally been cut loose. Walking away from that mirror, I carried myself differently. Not taller, not stronger, just more present. Like I'd finally stepped into my own life instead of watching it from the sidelines. And the strangest part was how normal everything else looked. Same apartment, same dishes in the sink, same to-do list on the counter. But my relationship with all of it felt altered. It was as if choosing to see myself changed what I saw in the world around me too. And for the first time in a long time I felt proud without needing a reason. Proud of the tiny steps. Proud of the progress only I could see. Proud that I didn't give up when it would have been so easy to. It wasn't a victory lap. It was more like finally taking ownership of who I was becoming. But I had no idea how much stronger that moment would have to make me for what was coming next. What surprised me most was how the changes inside me showed up in places that had nothing to do with my body. I started waking up without that familiar dread sitting on my chest. I didn't go to bed replaying every mistake I'd made that day. There was a softness in the way I talked to myself, like I'd finally stopped being my own critic and started being someone I could actually rely on. And I didn't notice any of this all at once. It revealed itself in these tiny, almost invisible ways, like catching myself humming while making breakfast or feeling genuinely present during a conversation instead of drifting off into anxiety. The strange part was how unfamiliar it felt to trust myself again. It was almost awkward, like reconnecting with an old friend you'd avoided for years. I realized how long I'd lived in survival mode, just trying to get through the day without falling apart. Now there was space. Space to think, space to breathe, space to imagine a future that didn't feel predetermined. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't dragging myself through my life. I was actually living it. And because I wasn't hiding anymore, people around me reacted differently too. A coworker told me I seemed lighter, not physically, but emotionally. A friend I hadn't seen in months said I looked more like myself, a comment that hit me harder than I expected. Even my mom, over a quick phone call, mentioned she could hear something new in my voice, like I wasn't carrying the same heaviness. I didn't know how to explain it to anyone, but it felt like I was rebuilding from the inside out. Even the quiet moments hit differently. Sitting by my window with a cup of coffee felt peaceful instead of lonely. Grocery shopping didn't feel like a chore. I wasn't rushing through everything as if I needed to earn the right to rest at the end of the day. I was just okay. Not perfect, not transformed, just okay in a way that felt steady and real. And that steadiness made room for something I hadn't dared to touch in years. Hope. The kind that didn't demand results or timelines. The kind that simply said, "You're on your way." It wasn't about becoming a new person. It was about returning to someone I'd forgotten. Someone who cared, someone who tried, someone who believed they were worth the effort. But looking back, that quiet strength was only preparing me for a truth I hadn't faced yet. The truth that this journey wasn't done changing me. I think what stays with me most is how quietly everything changed. There was no big finish line, no dramatic transformation montage, nothing that would make a great headline. It was just me, slowly becoming someone I could finally recognize again. Someone I wasn't embarrassed to be. And even now, I don't pretend to have it all figured out. Some days I feel strong, some days I still slip back into old fears. But the difference is, I don't abandon myself the way I used to. I don't disappear when things get hard. There's a kind of peace in that. A steadiness I didn't know I was missing. I stopped chasing the version of me I thought everyone else wanted and started choosing the version that felt honest. The one who gets tired, gets insecure, gets overwhelmed, but keeps moving anyway. And that shift did something to me I can't fully explain. Gave me room to breathe again. Gave me permission to hope again. And maybe that's why I'm sharing all this. Not because I think my story is extraordinary or because I have some grand lesson to teach. I don't. But because if you've ever looked at your life and thought, I can't keep going like this, then you already understand the moment that changed mine. That quiet, almost invisible point where you realize you deserve a life that feels like it belongs to you. I don't know exactly where this path is leading me. I just know I'm not walking it the same way I used to. I'm not hiding from myself anymore. I'm not waiting for permission to start over. And if anything in my journey resonates with you, even a small piece of it, I hope it gives you the same thing it gave me. A reminder that it's never too late to choose yourself again. If you want to follow the rest of this journey with me, I'd love for you to stick around. Subscribe, share your own story in the comments, whatever feels right. We're all figuring this out, one honest step at a time.